Welcome to Parenting Pioneers, the podcast where we journey through the vibrant communities of urban life, discovering the opportunities and challenges that await today's working parents. In a world that's changing faster than ever, how do we raise resilient, curious, and empowered kids? So whether you're navigating the digital playground, seeking local adventures, or striving for that ever-elusive work-life harmony, we're here to guide, inspire, and connect. I'm your host, David Watkins, and together we'll explore stories, strategies, and talk with experts that empower us to thrive in the parenting landscape. So parents, pioneers, let's find our way. We want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Plan My Kids. As busy parents, we all know the stress of trying to plan and organize activities for our kids. That's where Plan My Kids comes in. They make planning and attending kids' activities easy, offering personalized programs tailored to your family's interests and needs. So if you're feeling overwhelmed with planning kids' activities, let Plan My Kids take the wheel. Visit their website at planmykids.com and start your plan today. Remember, with Plan My Kids, you got this. And most importantly, your kids know this. Thanks again to Plan My Kids for their support of the podcast. In this episode, I sit down with Allison Grubbs, a licensed clinical social worker with expertise in the areas such as anxiety, depression, perfectionism, and parent-child relationships. Allison shares guidance from her journey as an art teacher to a therapist and her training under Dr. Brené Brown. The conversation delves deep into the challenges of perfectionism, especially in children, and the societal pressures that exacerbate it. We touch upon the importance of mastery over mere success and the role parents have in guiding their children through these challenges. Hi, Allison. How are you today? Thank you so much.
Hi, David.
Great. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excellent. So just to help our audience a little bit, can you kind of describe in a little bit more detail your professional background, your practice, and sort of how you got to your position today?
Sure. Well, my route to be a therapist is a little bit unconventional, I think. I got my undergraduate degree from NC State's College of Design in art and design, and then wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with that, but I knew I loved working with kids, and even though I was a kid myself back then. So I worked as a high school art teacher for about 2 years. And while I was teaching, I really felt called to do more to help the students that were really struggling. I saw a lot of students really struggling with their mental health. And so in exploring different graduate schools and graduate programs, I decided to do my master's in social work and attended UNC Chapel Hill. And after graduating, I worked at a substance use treatment center for a few years. I worked in a group practice with other clinicians. And now I have my own private practice in downtown Raleigh, and where I see teens, families, and adults. I am also in 2013, I went to Texas and got trained directly by Dr. Brené Brown. So a lot of people might be familiar with her. And so I think I was in one of the first cohorts of therapists to be trained in her various curricula, and one of which is based on the book Gifts of Imperfection, which is actually how I discovered her and her work. I read the book and then reread it and listened to her TED Talks, which is the way a lot of people find her work. And so now I've been in practice since 2008, and most of my work centers around working with people around shame, vulnerability, perfectionism, looking at how trauma impacts them. And now I'm also doing some leadership consulting and things like that.
That is awesome. An interesting path that you've taken to get to where you are today. Love Brené Brown myself. How was that just sort of being in that cohort with her? Like, I have to just kind of know because I'm a big fan myself.
Yeah. Well, I tell people, however you imagine her to be, that's exactly how she was. That was my experience. She was great. Excellent at training. And then her leadership group that was working with her to help train all of us. I think there were 80 of us at the time, and they were awesome. And so, being trained in her work is pretty involved. I mean, we had to go for several days, experience her work ourselves. And then we had to have a consultant for about 1.5 years after we got trained. So we stay a pretty tight knit group of people that are just working and certified in their work.
Oh, great. So so she talks a lot about vulnerability and how that's related to courage, and she also talks about perfectionism, which is what we're here to talk about today. So how would you define perfectionism, and why do you think it's become such a prevalent issue in today's society, especially for kids and families?
I guess a simple way to think about perfectionism would be it's the fear of making a mistake. It's a fear of not being good enough. I think a lot of people have seen or kind of think about perfectionism as a positive thing. But I like what Brené Brown says. She has this quote I love where if perfectionism is driving, shame is riding shotgun. And I really like that. And there's a difference between perfectionism and healthy striving, which I think when defining perfectionism, we sometimes get confused about. We can get confused about that. And a good way to differentiate those is perfectionism is really externally motivated. It matters what other people think, how we appear to others. Whereas healthy striving is about it's what do I think about what I'm doing. It's very internally motivated.
Yeah, and I think there's so many things in life that sort of propagate perfectionism. I mean, think about school. Like, we get grades. Like, it's an external thing. It's like, are you intrinsically motivated to learn, or are you just doing it for the grade, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
So what do you think some of the other sort of societal pressures for perfectionism that we have today in our society, and how it sort of impacts our mental health and self-esteem?
Yeah, when I was thinking about talking to you about this topic, I was kind of, I was making notes for myself, reviewing some things that I've read and learned. And I came across, it was a recent interview with the Surgeon General, and he talked about, he has a new book about loneliness, so it's somewhat connected, and the importance of just our relationships with each other and feeling connected. But he mentioned what society kind of tells us we should want is power, to be powerful, to be famous, to be rich. And I think things like social media, just the culture in general, just keep encouraging that, which can end up being pretty toxic, right? And so, and he talks about how we come into the world really as a baby, pretty content and just looking for points of connection and points of joy, and not really needing to have the fanciest thing or to look the best or to get things just right. It's kind of what the culture tells us that we need to do. And I think a lot of fear too is contributing to a lot of perfectionism, and then the perfectionism that then parents can kind of inadvertently put on their kids, because there's a lot of fear and scarcity in the world right now. I think a lot of economic fears. So that gets then passed from the parents to their children. Must achieve, must be successful. Success looks like making as much money as possible, being known, not messing up ever. And so there's a lot of rewards in some ways for that mentality. And I think, it's important to mention, I know we'll get into it more later, but that the more pressure that's put on kids, and especially they're picking up from themselves, but also it's on parents as well. I think you can't talk about perfectionism on kids more without talking about how it's impacting parents. And it really increases our anxiety too. And I think anxiety and perfectionism really go hand in hand.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the Surgeon General. I think just last Friday on Science Friday, they interviewed
him about this book and about loneliness, and my youngest child was in the car with me, and so it's one of those things where I want him to hear this as well. So it's like, I'm gonna drive a little further before we get home so he can hear this.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that I thought of while you were talking is, I don't know if you know the author, I can't remember if it's Miguel Ruiz or Ruiz Miguel, the four,
The Four Agreements.
The Four Agreements, yeah. And this whole concept of this fog, this dream that's been created, and it's created when we're kids, like we're born and we don't know better, but there's this, you're told you're a good boy, you're told you're a bad boy, you get punished and you get rewarded. So it's like we start that so early, with kids about creating this storyline of what life is supposed to be. And it's like, well, who says that that's the way it is, and
right, or what makes you good or bad.
Yeah. And so this interesting, so this weekend I had to go to a store, and a lot of these big box stores, they have exit and they have entrance, right? And they want you to kind of go through, but I was parked near the exit, and I was like, who says it's just the exit that I can't go through the exit? So I just went through, and I said, it's my belief system, I'll do whatever I want.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So speaking of parents and their own perfections and tendencies and how they influence children, so what are signs that parents should look out for themselves to make sure that they're not sort of teaching too much perfectionism, I guess, in their kids, or by their own examples? Teaching.
I think, it's if we know that perfectionism is really rooted in a lot of shame and scarcity, I think it's important for parents to, and this can be really hard work, for parents to look at their own relationship with themselves, and do they feel good enough? Because I think if we're looking at that, well, that's really the driver of a lot of perfectionism, is not feeling like we matter, not feeling like we're good enough. And I think parents can, or it's not, I'm not, and a lot of therapists get a bad rap for being parent blamers. So I'm not one of those therapists that's looking just to blame the parents. It's the parents are, parenting is a shame minefield, really. You're not doing this good enough, you're not doing that good enough, you need to do this, your kids are too involved, your kids are not involved enough, scheduled enough or overscheduled. There's all these, you can't do it just right. There's no just right. And so what I think parents can do is look at how they're either pushing back against that, and especially with each other, with peers and friends and in the community, and then how we're also talking to ourselves, how we're working through our own stuff, because whatever we haven't worked on, it can very easily get played out with our children. So I think, kids are always watching their parents, not just how they're talking to them, but how they talk to themselves too. And how they're treating themselves, really. From a very young age, kids are just sponges and absorbing everything. And we are also, kids are learning how to regulate themselves, how to know what's safe and what's unsafe, all by picking up on these little micro cues from their parents. And we're just starting to understand even what that looks like. So it goes beyond just what parents are directly saying to their children. So even if they're directly saying, you don't have to be perfect, you can be messy, you can make mistakes, I want you to make mistakes and learn, kids are really absorbing how the parents are treating themselves too.
So there's this balance, right, between pushing kids, maybe letting them fail sometimes. So how does a parent sort of balance that so that they can have their children strive for excellence and have high standards, but without falling into this trap of having to be perfect?
Sure. Yeah. I think a good way to look at this is the difference between mastery and success. And I like Sarah Lewis's book. I think it's Dr. Sarah Lewis. She wrote a book called The Rise. She was interviewed on Brené Brown's podcast. I believe it was the Dare to Lead podcast, for 2 episodes. But she talks about the importance of mastery versus success and has all these great examples and stories of, do you want just to achieve the for success, or do you want to actually learn how to master this thing that you're working towards or working on? And mastery really involves a lot of hard work and a lot of mistakes. And so I like to have a word for, okay, I'm helping a child master something rather than just achieve success in it. What we're doing to learn, what we're doing to try, what we're doing to gain experience, and valuing that. And I think that's super important, because I think I see a lot of parents in my practice sometimes focusing or I would say assuming that their kids don't care about their grades if they're maybe procrastinating or the grades aren't what they think they could be. And so I see that, and the reality is, unless there's something else going on, most kids I work with really do care about, they're getting those messages. They do care about their success. They do care about achieving. They do have goals. And so I think a big piece is parents encouraging a lot of curiosity with their kids through asking lots of questions. And I hear this a lot. My child is so smart, and they could go to any college they wanted to, that kind of thing. And I think for kids, they just hear that and feel that as a lot of pressure, and feel that as, I'm not doing good enough. I'm not living up to my potential. So there's this constant feeling of not living up to, versus, focusing on, if a child has worked hard at something, asking what they learned from that, asking about what kind of experience they gained from it. Curiosity can go a long way, and celebrating achievements while also just really celebrating hard work. I mean, because and being willing to try and take risk, because that's how we get innovative and creative people, is a lot of prototyping, trying and messing up, and then that's how you get something really amazing.
Yeah. So there's a few things that popped in my mind while you're describing that. The whole concept of trying things, not getting it right, redoing it so you can learn something. So as you're talking about like that, I'm thinking about, crafts, like people who their work or their play is crafting something, making pottery, glass blowing, anything. It's like, you kind of see the results, like, oh man, I was trying to make this and it didn't quite work, so I'm try again. But I learned that I was right. Well, in like an information age, like it's kind of hard to kind of get that visual piece of it. It's like, okay, I'm working. So you mentioned design thinking. Absolutely. If there's a problem in a business or a school project and you're going through that process, like that's kind of built in, so you can kind of do that. But just in other parts of this more information, like I feel like it's kind of hard to get that.
Right. And actually learning it, and it's not just working towards checking the box to get the grade.
Yeah. So so what are some strategies or exercises that children can do to cope with these feelings of perfectionism? Or how do they even spot it? Like, how do they say, oh my gosh, I'm trying to be too perfect? How do they kind of that?
Yeah. Well, and from a parent's perspective, or from children?
From a children's perspective. Like, children kind of spot that, and are there things they can do, and and to add to that, how do parents do they see it, and are there ways that they can guide them in other directions?
Yeah. I think, for parents looking at their children's behavior, and this varies obviously based on age, because it's going to be different when you're talking about an 8-year-old versus an 18-year-old, and it might look different. But when kids are younger, especially, it's, watching if their child is, making sure they have to print everything just right, tearing up their drawing that they did, not wanting it, throwing it away. This isn't good enough, and being kind of overly upset, kind of an inflated sense of this isn't good enough, and talking about comparing to other people and other students, I think can be a big sign that there's some perfectionism kind of seeping in, that it's comparison is a big one. I would say, there's, I forget who says, I forgot who said it, but it's that famous quote of, comparison is the thief of happiness, or comparison is the thief of joy. That you can, and we've all had that experience of, we think what we're doing is pretty good. It's like feeling pretty good about it. And then we start looking around at what other people are doing, I may, give a talk somewhere, and then I start looking at YouTube videos of other people giving a talk or watching other therapists work. And I go, oh, well, maybe I'm not that great. Maybe I thought I was doing pretty good. I mean, artists have this all the time with, I think I'm doing something pretty awesome and pretty good. And then I start looking around and, oh, it wasn't that great. Maybe it's not that great. And it's all about comparison. And then if that's driving this anxiety and this pressure to get something just right, then that's perfectionism. So I think those are big warning signs. And I think for kids, particularly if, there's a teenager listening to this or are thinking about this, it goes back to, where is my motivation coming from? What's driving me here? Am I trying to achieve for other people? Am I trying to achieve to be successful in other people's eyes? Or do I actually really care about this? Is this something I actually value? Is this something that's actually important to me or not?
Yeah. Do you find that kids that tend to have perfectionism do it in certain areas of their life, say in sports or in academics, or if they're a perfectionist, it's across the board, like they're going to do it in every walk of their life?
Yeah, I've seen both, but I think it's not uncommon for it to present in some specific areas, actually. That's why it's a little mysterious, can be sometimes hard to spot. I think that it doesn't always look like what somebody would think. And so this brings to mind the idea of procrastination and perfectionism. And so folks that procrastinate can actually really be struggling with perfectionism. So if parents are coming to me and she just won't get started, she's just not starting her work, she just won't start, that's a sign there's probably some perfectionism, because if I can't get it just right, if it has to be perfect, that's really overwhelming. And so let's just not even start. I don't even want to get started on it. And so that it can look like a kid with a messy bedroom. It can look like a kid with, not doing really that well in school. I think that's the other piece that people think of perfectionism. They think it's going to be neat, tidy, everything just so, and straight A student. And it doesn't always look like that. So the kids that are really struggling in school that aren't coming out of the room can actually be really struggling with perfectionism.
Wow, it's like a complete flip, right? It's like perfectionism, neat, order. No, perfectionism, messy, procrastinating. It's like, oh my gosh, which is it? If in either case, I guess, but especially in a child is procrastinating for the fear of getting it perfect, right? What can a parent do to help that child sort of take the first step towards that? There's something that they can do, a parent can do to kind of give them that nudge and sort of help guide them to the end goal?
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation, but I think in the situation of my child just won't get started, right? I think it's validation goes a long way, and validating and empathy aren't saying, yes, what you believe is true, this has to be perfect, and it's completely overwhelming and you can't achieve it, right? So if the child's having that struggle of, I just feel stuck, I don't think I can get started, it's so hard to get started, or even gives you the, like, I don't think I even care about this thing. I think it's really powerful for a parent just to go, yeah, I get that. I get it. Yep. I've totally been there, because we all have. And so just that is not saying, yes, I agree with your thoughts and the story that's in your head. It's saying, yeah, I get it. That makes a lot of sense. Why, given all the pressure at school, or given this pressure or that pressure, that it would feel really impossible to start. I get that. And just those simple words, or that makes sense, I understand, I get it, really starts to shift things and open things up for a child. And so then I think that once that door's open a little, like this person, my parent, is understanding me, is sitting next to me and with me, that there's a little bit more opening to then say, why don't we just try a small goal? Why don't we just try one little piece of it and like break it apart, and try one little piece and see what that feels like. Right.
That's so true. I mean, that whole sitting with your child in the dark, as Brené would say, I think as a parent, it's really hard, because as parents, like we want to be active and help and do things, but sometimes the right answer is just to sit there and just be there.
Yeah, a lot of times parents want to jump in and start, especially when your child comes to you and is really defeated and has this story in their heads that everyone's doing it better than me, I'm not good enough, I can't do this. When a child comes to a parent that way, they want to immediately say, no, that's not true, that you're doing amazing, you're great, your stuff's perfect, you're going to do great. Like, it's jumping to fixing it or trying to fix it. And really, I think what's most helpful is just acknowledging, yep, I get that feeling, I understand that. And that requires the parent for us to sit with our own stuff and our own feelings that we can all relate to.
Yeah. So all right. So we kind of talked about some things parents should do and kind of some things they shouldn't do, but can you just kind of summarize that one more time for the audience? Like, do this, don't do that.
Yeah. So I would say a big piece is not focusing on your child's specific achievements, but focus rather on their efforts and how hard they tried. Did they work hard? Did they take a risk? And then encouraging them to name their own goals, encouraging them to identify their own goals. And then, when there's success, definitely celebrating it, but also celebrating when they tried, and it's not about just giving the award to everybody. It's more about this celebrating something specific and naming it, and saying, this is what we're celebrating. Yes. But that, what did you learn? What could you do better next time? And that's encouraging that mastery piece. And then I would say, don't assume your child doesn't care. And if your child's procrastinating, if your child's struggling with getting something done, that it may be linked to some anxiety, it may be linked to some perfectionism. And think for the things to do is ask more questions. A lot of curiosity goes a long way, and empathy and validating feelings, validating experience, and really tolerating your child's sadness, tolerating your child's disappointment, can also really allow for and demonstrate to their child that it's okay to have messiness in life, that we're not there can be a lot of pressure to just even that phrase, I just want my kids to be happy, that allowing your kids not to have perfectionism around their emotional experience either, that they can be disappointed, they can be angry, they can be sad, they can be worried, and just empathy, the big empathy piece,
Yeah, that's great. Let me ask a different audience. If you were a provider of activities for kids, so like you were talking about the awards, like my kids did martial arts when they grew up, and it was great. Like, it was good for their physical self-control, a little bit of discipline. And I just remember at the end they would do these competitions, and man, they would get trophies that were like taller than they were when they were 6 and 7 years old.
Yeah.
But if you were a provider of any sort of activities for kids, like what any recommendations on structuring your program so that you don't foster perfectionism? Are they the same as what parents should be doing, or are there any subtle differences?
I think it's similar. Yeah, I think it's similar because any adult in a child's life is having a big influence and being a guide and a mentor to those kids. And so I think it's very similar. I think also it's looking at what are we hoping to achieve with these activities, And I really believe, and it's kind of what am I hoping to achieve as a parent? What's the point of parenting? What is it for? And what are the points of this activity or this extracurricular thing, this whatever program it is? It may be to encourage and foster excitement and play and curiosity around a certain activity, and even encourage them to want to master that and get better at it, which means making a lot of mistakes and keep coming back. And then it also a big piece, I think, should be is encouraging belonging and connectedness, and because it's so important. Like we were talking about with the Surgeon General's book, it comes back to that is so important for our nervous systems, for us feeling really regulated and feeling safe, is a sense of belonging. And so if we're kind of set apart in different tiers and different levels, and these are the people that are winners and losers, then we're not necessarily feeling that sense of belonging and connectedness. And so I think we can be competitive. I think there's a place for competitiveness. That can be a great thing. And it can be competitive and still feel like I belong. And there can still be this sense of playfulness with it.
Great. For our parents out there, are there any resources that you might recommend them seeking to learn more about this topic?
Yeah, so I would say, Dr. Brené Brown would be a top one. And she has her book, Gifts of Imperfection, which is wonderful. I think the way it's organized is in the guideposts that she's, what we're kind of trying to not do as much and what we're trying to cultivate. And then her book, Daring Greatly, is wonderful. And she has a whole section on parenting, which is great. I highly recommend. And her Wholehearted Parenting Manifesto is wonderful. Everybody should print that out. And then Dr. Becky Kennedy, for just general parenting advice. Hers is a little bit more geared to younger kids, but her book is called Good Inside. And then Rachel Simmons has a book called Enough as She Is, but that's more geared towards adolescent girls specifically. So
great. Before I get to my last question as a summary, I have a pop question for you.
Okay.
What superpower do you think would make parenting easier?
Oh, wow. Superpower that makes parenting easier. The first thing that pops into my mind is self-compassion.
Oh, okay. The power of self-compassion.
Yeah. So I think if parents, there's a very therapist answer in mine, but yeah, I think parents being able to create compassion for themselves would actually make parenting so much easier, because there's, like I said, it's a shame minefield. There's so much pressure to be perfect and to achieve, and for kids to achieve then. So if there's more self-compassion or more compassion in general, then we as adults do better and kids do better.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the beginning of our conversation. Like, parents project things, right, that their kids pick up on. So if they can project self-compassion, then hopefully their kids will pick up on that as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, are there any other thoughts or advice you'd like to share with our listeners today about parenting in the age of perfectionism?
Yeah, I think if perfectionism is really driven by a lot of fear and anxiety and some scarcity, and a lot of my work centers around the nervous system. I know we didn't touch on that too much, but I think, parents have a lot of, influence over how regulated their kids feel, and therefore how regulated they feel. And so I think focusing on that, building connection, building a sense of belonging within the community, within your family, that no matter if you mess up or not, you always will belong here, really helps us all feel safer and helps kids feel safer. And I think then as a byproduct, we'll see less perfectionism, and we'll see a lot more ease and joy in actually trying new things and exploring, and then therefore even more success too. Because I think a big question to ask ourselves is, do we want more achievement, or do we want more resilience in our kids?
Great. Well, thank you so much for this conversation today. I learned a lot. It's such an important topic, and for kids today and how they grow. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
Thanks so much, David. I hope it was helpful for folks that are listening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
In today's enlightening episode, we delved deep into the world of perfectionism, understanding its roots and exploring its impact on both parents and children alike. Our guest Allison Grubbs shared invaluable insights, shedding lights on the societal pressures that fuel perfectionism and offering practical strategies to navigate these challenges. A heartfelt thank you to Allison for joining us today. Your expertise and perspective have undoubtedly provided our listeners with a fresh lens through which to view and address perfectionism. We're grateful for the knowledge and tools you shared with our community. If today's episode resonated with you, we encourage you to share it with fellow parents and friends. Don't forget to subscribe for more insightful discussions. Your feedback is invaluable, so please leave a review or drop us a comment. Let's continue this conversation and support each other in our parenting journeys. Thanks for sharing a moment with us. We look forward to the next one. Until then, go and be the best parent you can be. We're rooting for you.